morning, everyone. Good morning.
Good morning.
Today, we are here to talk about risk. My name is Yassamin Ansari. I currently serve as the Vice Mayor of Phoenix, Arizona, the fifth largest and one of the fastest growing and also fastest warming cities in the United States. I am proud to be the youngest woman ever elected to the Phoenix City Council. I was 28 years old when I was elected, which I'll say was a little bit of a risk to run for office at that age. And in a previous life, I started my career in 2014 working at the United Nations. I served on former United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon's team in the lead up to the adoption of the Paris Climate Agreement, and then went on to work on several global climate summits. And it was actually my fundamental belief that cities are not only on the front lines of the climate crisis, but also need to be at the forefront of solutions that made me run for public office. So excited for this conversation today. I think risk is something that, no matter what, we all take in our lives every single day, whether we are deciding to go out without an umbrella when there's a 25% chance of rain, or whether we are deciding to invest millions of dollars into a new idea. We are all aware of risk, but I think we choose to downplay it. And sometimes it feels like to highlight very knowable, observable risk, even when there's so much data behind it, is to be seen as alarmist. But the question that we are here to ask today is, are the conditions, especially those that are associated with climate change in the environment, such that we need to be a little bit more upfront about the future and embrace the preparations that are required? And if so, how is this accomplished? We know that the 10 across cities that are involved are very much some of the most rapidly growing urban centers across the United States, but they are also the ones that may be facing more threats from the climate crisis, whether that be heat, flooding, air pollution, drought, and destructive weather events, again, all as a byproduct of climate change. Hurricane Katrina was the most costly natural/man-made event in U.S. history. And while not as dramatic as a singular event, we know that the slow rolling decline of the Colorado River poses significant risk to more than 40 million people across the Southwest. So risk is based on an awareness of threats that are knowable, and the 10 across is the premier laboratory for understanding our capacity and will to respond proactively. So I'm excited to be joined today by an incredible panel of women. We have people here consisting of a panel consisting of a local resilience officer, the founder and executive director of a statewide nonprofit, and a federal agency leader. So we're going to start at the federal level today, and I'd like everyone to introduce themselves. So if you could tell us in 3 minutes or less who you are, what you do, and how climate planning and risk assessment factors into the work that you do.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Victoria Salinas. I oversee FEMA resilience. Many of you, when you think of FEMA, probably think about our response and recovery mission, but we are also an agency that focuses on resilience before, during, and after disasters. And I'm part of the Biden-Harris administration, and I think what's really interesting about my role and FEMA today is that I was asked to come into FEMA resilience because of my background, right? I was a chief resilience officer in Oakland, California, the first CRO there. I worked with the World Bank in disaster risk management. I'd been at FEMA working on community recovery post-Katrina with that long-term view. And so I think it really is emblematic of a shift that FEMA and the federal family is trying to support, which is looking at the intersection of all of these issues, all of the disciplines, and how we leverage the strengths of every sector to build a more resilient nation. And so I'm thrilled to be here at 10 Across, and big thank you to Duke, Ray, Sabine, everyone and Casi for reaching out to invite me. But the way we think about climate planning is that absolutely, one of the core steps in becoming resilient is understanding risk. And we're absolutely at a time where, while we've got many tools to understand historic risk, we are also recognizing that history and the rearview mirror is not indicative of what tomorrow may hold. And we're sitting in a city that had 3 500-year flood events back to back, right? That's not what history would have predicted. And we're also sitting at a point in history where there are new tools using global climate models that are helping us get closer to downscaled data that is actionable for local leaders. FEMA had the honor to participate with Argonne National Lab and AT&T on a new climate risk and resilience portal that brings it down to like the 7-kilometer level for certain types of risks. And so we're at a really important point where the data is starting to exist. But part of what we're doing always at FEMA as well is working with our state, local, tribal, territorial partners to build capacity, to actually use that information to do something about risk. And that's where the planning piece comes. You have to have a plan that's data-driven, understands risk, but that is all really linked up with how you build long, sustained capacity to do something, to develop plans, involve the community, that then leads to projects. And we fund, this year alone, we have like over $3 billion in funding through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act and other sources. And so it's a really interesting time for us to really, to your question, start to couple how you plan with how you take action and how you build capacity so that all communities, specifically the most disadvantaged, underserved communities who oftentimes have less capacity, less resources, are able to take the actions they need to reduce risk and address climate change.
Thank you so much, Victoria. Next, we will go to Margaret.
All right, thank you very much, and welcome to Houston, my home city. And I lead an organization called Texas 2036. For those of you not from here, that is the bicentennial of our state, and a way for us to help policymakers stay focused on the longer term and not just the next tweet. It is bipartisan, data-informed, focused on the biggest issues like education, health, natural resources, infrastructure, and so forth. I like to say if we were going to put it on a bumper sticker, it would say we're putting together the sensible center to think long-term about the big things using tons and tons of data. So we are very much data-driven organization. My own background is as a recovering federal bureaucrat, having served as the Secretary of Education during Hurricane Katrina, and a lot of experience around those issues, as well as knocking around the state legislature for a good while as well. I've led the University of North Carolina system, and so have been involved in state, federal, and local policy making and our institutions that support those efforts in and out of government. I guess I would say that the way that we get people started around risk is to have a shared understanding of what the facts are and the data, and to frame that and speak to it in ways that people can understand and receive. So I find, or have found in my many decades in public policy, that calling someone an uninformed dumbass doesn't really engender a lot of goodwill and good work. So that is what we are about, getting people centered around the facts, out of the corners and onto the facts.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here. Next, we will go to Casi.
Hi, I'm Callaway. I'm the Chief Resilience Officer for the City of Mobile. And I guess I kind of have to introduce you to Mobile just to make sure I dispel some of the rumors. We are a conservative state and in a conservative city, but we also, I would say the City of Mobile is probably leaning closer to purple at this point, but in a sea of red. So we have to walk a very fine line, an interesting line, talking about climate. In my past life, I've been the Chief Resilience Officer for a whopping year and a half. And I think in government terms, that's like 2 weeks. You have to be there 10 years for it to be 150,000 years. Is that what Nicole Freeney told us the other day? But before that, I served for 23 years as the Mobile Baykeeper, the environmental advocate who we sue people, we fight fights, we work on environmental issues to make sure we've got clean water, clean air, healthy communities, all that kind of good fun stuff. But being in Mobile, I will tell you that over those 23 years, I never one time worked on climate change. I didn't use the word, I didn't share the word, because that was essentially calling them a dumbass, and that is not appropriate in Mobile, Alabama. It also doesn't win you friends, and it doesn't get you where you need to go. You don't win your campaigns that way. Did I work on climate change? Every day. Did we work on those issues? Every day. But what is so interesting to me is over the last probably 5 or 7 years in Mobile, and again, a Mobilian is somebody who loves their natural resources, but we don't call it that. We call it the beach. We call it the bay, a creek, a river, the delta. We fish, we hunt, we are outdoors all the time. We care about it, we love it. It is our everything. But if you say, are you an environmentalist, the answer to that question is no. So it's a fun challenge and a fun walk. But what we are seeing is a few years ago, we're doing a watershed management plan post BP oil disaster, which did change people's view in a great way, positive way, that we found out that we had to talk about climate, we had to talk about the environment, we had to talk about oil and gas. But people saw that they were losing shoreline. They'd been losing shoreline for a really long time, but they noticed. They noticed they were losing islands. And when the environmental and the science community came to them and said, that's because of sea level rise and climate change, they said, oh, well, what are we going to do about it? And that's, I think, where we are today in Mobile. I think it's why the mayor said, okay, we'll do a chief resilience officer. It's why we're getting ready to look at risk and look at those different pieces. And with that, I'll wait till you tell me to talk some more.
All right. Thank you, Casi. We've spent some time these past few days, so I've learned a lot about Mobile, Alabama. So the first topic we're going to talk to today is growth. I think, especially when it comes to future planning, growth is one of the most high-risk, high-reward areas that, or challenges that I think a city, state, or country can face. In Phoenix, we love to talk about how we are one of the fastest-growing cities. I think 2015 to 2021, we were the fastest-growing city in the United States. And while that growth has been very exciting and bringing a lot of great opportunities, like largest foreign direct investment with TSMC and semiconductor manufacturing, et cetera, we also have to be very concerned about what that means for water planning and infrastructure and transportation. So at the same time, we are, we just passed a policy to be careful about our water usage and future developments, passing policies around being careful around additional sprawl and growth in the wrong direction. And we are also really focused on transportation, whether that be investing in public transportation or electrifying our existing transportation systems. So I want to understand how you three think about growth. I think Texas is one that I would like to start with. Obviously, Texas and your cities are experiencing exponential growth as well. So Margaret, if you could tell us, how you think about growth, what it means for planning, for infrastructure, and all the rest. Thank you.
We are about 20 million people in Texas now. I'm sorry, 30 million people, going to about 40 million by our bicentennial, 2040-ish. We have 3 of the nation's largest cities, and I think the El Paso metro area is 12th or 13th. And so we're big, we're very urban, but we also have a rural population larger than the total population of 18 other states. I sound like a Texas braggadocio, don't I? I'm sorry about that. That's what we do here. So anyway, we are growing, and we think that's a huge advantage, but also we have found that newcomers do not bring their own roads and water systems and so forth with them. And so, again, a way to think about and project and think longer term than the next legislative session. One of the many benefits, and I say this with all sincerity, is that our legislature meets 140 days every 2 years, even though most Texans think they should meet 2 days every 140 years, is a legislature that relies on a public policy, academic, and civic organization infrastructure to inform their work. They are truly a part-time legislature, and so they're not working at it every day, and so that gives real opportunities for organizations like mine to proliferate the data. It obviously requires leadership across the state and partnerships with people like Mayor Turner and our own mayor in Dallas and everywhere else, county officials, and kind of getting the band together on a shared agenda, especially now with these federal resources and the incredible growth in revenues that we have in Texas because of the fossil fuel industry, largely, that give us some real opportunity to invest long-term in water infrastructure and other things like that. Our policymaking environment is improving. We have passed legislation in the recent past to require the state climatologists to be consulted as we do water planning and so forth, so it's not just they're over there bloviating about whatever. It truly is an integrated part of the public policy making. But organizations like mine and many others build what I call civic demand for the work. And if you don't have an engine fueling that civic demand, it's not possible to move forward on policy making that's largely embraced and engendered and supported and re-electable, if I could be crass like that, in a place like Texas.
Great, thank you. Let's go to the local level. Let's go to Mobile, Alabama.
So Mobile is not, the city has not grown the way we want it to, with people and population. And part of that is because we're really wet. So we've got a whole new slew of issues that are associated with sea level rise, and that we can't build in some of our low-lying areas. We shouldn't be building in our low-lying areas, and we're trying to encourage that growth elsewhere. So we're working to grow through annexation, but our county next to us is growing. It is growing. It's the fastest growing county in the state of Alabama, and we're the coast. So keep that in mind. We are the coast of Alabama. Where we are growing is industry. Good industry in a lot of cases. We're about to be the #1 city. We're about to be the #1 manufacturing facility location for Airbus. Our Austell, which is a shipbuilding, the Littoral Combat Ship is being built in Mobile. We built all of the aluminum ones, and now we're building the steel ones. And those, San Diego's our partner city, but we are the center for that growth and development. The jobs are coming to Mobile. The workforce is needed in Mobile. The other ways we're growing is we're about to build a $3 billion bridge. Thank you, Senator Shelby. We will miss you desperately. We are moving our airport from West Mobile to downtown. We have probably in this one area, and I'm gonna brag about yesterday's email. In the one area from downtown to Brooklyn, which is just a beautiful area, we probably have about $5 billion worth of investment that's going into growth in this area. Bordered by the river. On the east side, it's the river. On the west side, it's low-income communities with a bridge. But it's all waterfront property. It's all areas, and port, heavily industrialized port. So how do we make the port beautiful? How do we protect the port and that economy from sea level rise and climate risk? We got a $30 to $50 million grant noticed yesterday that we get to rebuild a whole waterfront area. And that's the kind of growth that we have to, how we do that is what we're looking at in every way, shape, and form. Mobile does not really familiar with low impact design or green infrastructure, and that's what my role has got to be, is saying how we grow has got to include these other factors. We have to build stormwater storage so that we can remain on our waterfront, but we don't kill it with sea level rise. We've got to be there, so how do we make sure we can be there for 50 years or longer? I love what the Port of Houston has been facing and looking at and addressing, and we've heard a lot about that over the past couple of days, because if they don't build that right, if they don't build in protections, and that means higher expense, but that long-term investment, because Mobile's port is the 12th largest port in the country, and we have the fastest growing container facility in the country. So we've got all this stuff that's right there at our fingertips, but if we don't build it right, if we are not careful and responsible about it, and all of that how is risk, and it's thinking about the long term. It is, I think this is the way, stop looking at what did we used to do, how did we do it before, and think about how do we need to be doing it tomorrow and the next step.
Wonderful, thank you. Victoria.
Well, I think you heard that growth is very hyper-local in the United States. And that's also, I think, how we look at it at the federal level, that most of the decisions around growth, land use planning, et cetera, are local decisions. Like even coming from the city of Oakland, how we grow, like we were putting in anti-displacement things at the local level, ordinances to try and grow in a way that was more equitable. But I think as we zoom out to even the region, and you, Yassamin, mentioned Colorado River Basin, right? Like as the I-10 cities grow, 20 to 40 million. That's a big difference, right? So some of the key characteristics of a resilient system are things like redundancy, flexibility, adaptability. And so building an infrastructure system that can absorb what we don't yet know in a way that doesn't deplete the resources we know are depleting is an important part of how we grow and really thinking about the future growth, because we want opportunity for people, right? We want the nation to move forward, but it has to be in a way that when we zoom out and look at growth regionally, nationally, the interconnectedness of many different natural systems, that we're doing it in a way that is enabling those systems to remain resilient for the future.
Got it. So one of the things I really enjoy about city government is the ability to be flexible and adaptable and create new, offices or systems where they need to be created. When I started in 2021, I came on, and actually our former city manager's here, and he, had this proposal about a new office of heat response and mitigation. And we voted that into place in 2021. It was the country's first publicly funded office of heat response, knowing that Phoenix is, on the front lines of extreme heat, and we need probably specialized capacity and knowledge to be able to start responding to that. We have since we have also a big refugee population in Phoenix, especially in recent years. And so we've recently created a refugee and asylum navigator position at the city, a new office of homelessness response. So something I want to talk about with you all is what you think is the role of, at the city level, state level, federal level, of creating new systems, whether that's oversight systems or just new capacity to take on these issues that we're facing that have to do with risk. And I'll start with Casi, and you actually told me a story the other day about even your own position and seeing a need there. So maybe you could start with that story, but just tell us a little bit more about that.
Thank you. Well, I am Duke knows this, that I am a 10 Across groupie and fangirl. I learned about Chief Resilience Officers here. I didn't know what that was at all, but a year and a half into the job, my father still asks me, what is it that I do? And so it's interesting. And what you do as a Chief Resilience Officer is varied. It's different. And I think all the ones who are here today could tell you their own story about what their priority issue is, where they started, where their office is settled. What I can tell you, though, is you keep looking at what's there and what's not there. And a Chief Resilience Officer, in my opinion, which may just be one opinion, I don't know, I can't see everybody out there, but it's that person's job is to connect other people. It is to figure out, what do you have that this group needs? And not just across city systems, but that's huge. We get to doing what we're doing in any work world that we're in, and we don't look up and see, oh, wait, Yassamin has a better idea on how to do this, or Victoria has a better idea on how to do this. Let me try their idea. So a lot of what a Chief Resilience Officer is doing, that I'm doing, is bringing people together who have the best ideas, internally, externally, the private sector, for-profit and nonprofit. All these guys have great ideas, and just because I didn't want to hang out with them at the bar last night does not under any circumstances mean they can't be the one to solve the problem. So there's a little bit of that in terms of how we operate and how we roll. But I think that we've got to consistently also, I think I said this to somebody walking over this morning, it's that if we think we're the ones with the best idea in the room, then why haven't we already solved it? So we've got to find the people out there who are thinking about it and help them think about it differently and really do that connection. So, a Chief Resilience Officer is walking in with a bunch of knowledge of their own, probably in their own field. I know so much about water, infrastructure, sewer spills, you name it, I got it. I can talk to you about that for days. For ozone layer, I got it. But I don't know necessarily how building houses works for the homeless community until I come to this, until I learn from other people or my neighborhood and community development person. So I think, creating those positions, and what I'm seeing is over time, we will be creating other positions within the Chief Resilience or the Office of Resilience. But what I also know is if the office doesn't remain flexible, able to be in and out of other departments, that it will hinder us. So how do we do that, and what other positions will we need is going to be a product of time. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that works. But certainly, I think remaining flexible, because that's what we got to do too.
Thank you. Margaret, I'm sure through your work you have, through Texas 2036 have come up with many needs or identified needs. If you could tell us a little bit more about that.
This is really a fascinating, super wonky, thorny policy thing we're talking about, which is, what is the relationship between the authorities and responsibilities and expectations for local communities, the state, and the federal government? and something that we calibrate and recalibrate all the time across the policy spectrum, education, these issues, and whatnot. And so I think, you know, it's important for us to think about how we not create just sort of a random acts of kindness strategy to something where it's truly a way for us to learn from each other around certain conditions and what our expectations are for the future of where we want to be, how fast we can get there, understanding the economic climate and culture of a region like the ones that you and I live in, Casi. And so that sounds like super nerdy, but I think it all goes back to data and our shared understanding of, you know, where we are, what the implications of where we are and how we move to a different place. And so we have been successful as an organization going to the legislature and saying, you know, uniquely as an organization, data, 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 and that our state government needs to invest in, endorse, be guided by, you know, a set of facts that we've all agreed to. They may be different than the ones you're looking at in Arizona, probably are. But I think to kind of continue to channel people into the same place so that we're not in random acts of kindness, we're learning from each other, we're understanding what the outcomes to the good and to the bad are so that we can deploy our resources most effectively. As a state and federal policymaker, especially as a federal policymaker with a big giant checkbook like the Biden administration has now and the bipartisan infrastructure, et cetera, amazing opportunities to do that and amazing opportunities to kind of call a tune around those expectations. You can get money if you X over what period of time? And it's, I mean, that's how we do education policy making, or used to anyway. So anyway, I will stop there, but I'm a kind of a Johnny one note, I guess.
Thank you. Victoria.
So I do think this is for building a resilient nation and addressing the climate crisis globally, this is the question about around governance. And we heard the mayor say that disasters oftentimes lead to transformational moments. And we're at one of those moments now when it comes to the climate crisis we're living, but we lack the operational backbone that you see when everyone comes together for a disaster response, and then when they're planning the long-term recovery. And so we end up with the random acts of kindness or the sectors doing something and then being surprised that somebody else is doing something adjacent because we haven't figured out how to operationalize resilience. And so that's one of the things we're actually going to be trying to tackle this year in a whole community approach with this administration too. Because there isn't the guidance, there isn't the doctrine, there's not the clear roles and responsibilities. In Mobile, it might be Casi as the CRO leading, but her role and responsibility to do certain things, be that connector, be that convener, maybe the head of public health in a different county, and maybe somebody else. But that role and responsibility of connector is an essential role. And there are many other essential roles, but we haven't yet turned this new discipline into one that can be executed with the urgency that the moment of time we are in demands of us. And so that I think is the big thing in front of us in the years to come, is really figuring out how to create a governance structure, operationalize resilience so that we can leverage all of the great assets everyone has. It's like a big puzzle piece. It's like we have that image, we've got the data of what the front of that puzzle box of thousands and thousands of pieces looks like, but we have to figure out how we work together in teams in different parts of that puzzle, who's got this edge, who's doing that, so that we can repeatably do that given the enormity of the challenges we're facing.
And if I may add, I think what I'm hearing you say is the word I wrote down that I didn't say, which is embed the work. And I think it's the same with what Margaret is doing and the data that she's collecting. We talked about this last night too, or over the past couple of days, is we realized on Tuesday when the CROs got together that we're not defining terms the same. Right. And then when you collect data that doesn't match the terms, so water in Phoenix is very different than water in Mobile. Water means flooding for me, water means I need some for you. Yeah. So it's very different. So how do we, I mean, it's easy to measure water though. How much rainfall did you have? That's easy, so we know. And so getting the terms right helps us also to really deeply embed the work. I met Victoria because of her work to embed resilience across the frameworks that FEMA uses. So every emergency management agency will use in the future. That will help drive how we look at resilience in our cities and our counties and our states. And I think that, you know, I serve at the pleasure of the mayor. So if my mayor doesn't run or the next mayor's not somebody I'd want to support, then I've got to leave with this work so deeply embedded in the city of Mobile's decision-making that it will last forever. Getting the state to do the same thing and getting the federal government to do the same thing, then we can be sure that our risks are covered better, that our ability to fight or solve climate is in there and more deeply embedded and working. So I think that's a big piece that we've got to keep in mind.
And I think one thing I would add additionally is that having a more defined governance structure or repeatable approach to investing in resilience allows other investors. Yes. You mentioned that we have, through the bipartisan infrastructure law, $1 trillion that could all be resilience dollars if implemented correctly. And so we are also at a point where there's so much capital that could be used for climate adaptation and resilience that it could de-risk more private sector capital. But the private sector needs more kind of understanding of what's going to be done, what's happening in the future, how do we partner, and so there is that broader, to enable those public-private sector partnerships and the private sector to step in even a larger way, we need more governance around how we do this work together.
Can I just jump in quickly too? And I would commend folks to our strategic framework for Texas. To me, it starts with, what are our shared expectations? In our framework, we have 36 goals articulated for Texas, like Texans breathe clean air. Can we agree on that? Texans have access to clean water. Can we agree on that? And so that, you know, first principles in ways that people understand it in a broader way than just a regional whatnot is just critical. And I, you know, with all respect to everybody in public life, I think the leadership is more and more and has to come from outside of government. We have to have that civic demand from the private sector. You heard it from Bobby Tudor, and from the business community, the faith community, like we've done in Houston on the homelessness issue, to build that ground up capacity.
Mm-hmm. Thank you all. Extremely, extremely insightful. Before we open it up to questions, I have one more question for you. We mentioned at the beginning that you cannot win this conversation or make a connection with someone by calling them a dumbass. I also
Thank you for that.
Also, as you know, as an elected official, I also know strongly that you also cannot win by only having a message that's about doom and gloom, but it's about how do we create the sense of urgency, but also inspire hope and faith and action and create that demand, like exactly as you said. So if we could start with Victoria at the federal level, I just want to talk about messaging and how you think we do a better job communicating about these issues.
Well, I'll start with, we have only up to go in terms of messaging.
Okay.
Yes, it is something we're actually talking about all the time. Like, there are so many inspirational stories of Grand Forks, North Dakota, someone seeing that there was a lot of freezing happening in the mountains and in the river, and in the river, and being like, oh, there's a forecast of flooding in April when this thaws. I'm going to go use my end of year bonus to buy flood insurance, and then the forecast was correct and the person is fine, right? So there's lots of these stories that get to oh, the data said that this was going to happen, and so I took an action and then I was better for it. But we don't lift up those stories very well. And I'll share a little anecdote even from this week. I wanted to get a better sense for all the disaster risk and climate risk that affected the I-10. I got a spreadsheet back from my team with I'll share it with 10 Across, but it was a spreadsheet with all the hazards and all the risks, but that wasn't the story. I'd asked for tell me the story of what's happening across the corridor so I can better understand, and it was an Excel spreadsheet. So it is something that we
Data.
without the narrative. So it is something that we're constantly trying to improve, but I think the crux of it is understanding different audiences and what we're trying to influence. Whether it's, I mentioned insurance, we want to close the insurance gap because we know that helps people recover, but what's going to influence someone to take an action? Or we'd like to see building code adoption go up from 36% nationally to higher, because going to the point of growth, even if you don't zoom out and look at things regionally, at least you can build in a way that you know that people are going to be safer when something happens. And so influencing that is like, there's so many positive stories that tell the story of why building codes matter for saving lives and reducing loss. So it is something that we're constantly trying to improve. And the Resilient Nations Partnership Network is one of the things that FEMA has with nationally, and the theme for the year is storytelling, stories of resilience. So we don't have the answers, but we know that it needs to be positive, but you also need to educate with the facts, but you don't, to your point, it doesn't need to be doom and gloom, but showing that arc of how you can take action, how it can make a difference, and how you can learn from others is core.
Okay. Margaret, what do you think?
I want to stipulate and violently agree with all of that and add a couple of things. One, the kind of language that's used here in Texas, we talk about energy expansion, not energy transition. Transitions mean something's going off real soon. It's probably not. And in a place like Houston, Texas, with an industry and a workforce, et cetera, you get it. So resilience, preparedness, that kind of thing, those half-full ways that are not, threatening to my job today. So language and messengers, not there goes, the vice president again or whatever, not that there's anything wrong with the vice president talking about these things, but we have to have the people that will, can talk to those that need to listen to this message.
Right.
And so we have to, that's why I was excited to see some of the folks on this program today, including me, that we have to think across the aisle about these things and have the right and different messengers that are compelling to people who need to hear it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'll echo, these two are fabulous. That's exactly it. It's the one ad I'll give is, it's scary. So if we scare people, they, especially, we're going to put our heads in the sand and we're going to hide and we're going to say, well, this is what's coming. It was God's plan. And that's, God gave us big brains to use and use regularly, use more often, more frequently, please. So we need to give people the tools, the enthusiasm, the knowledge that we can do something about this. Now, can we stop getting to 2-degree change? I don't know, and I don't know how to work on that in Mobile, Alabama. I'm grateful for the really super smart people I've met here who are working on climate every single day, focused on that. What we've got to do as cities, I think, and states, and needing our support from FEMA, is to look at that mitigation, is to look at how do we build resilience into our cities, our communities, our people. And I think that's I've heard 2 different numbers from the stage, and somebody's going to send us the right number, but for every $1 invested, there's 6 return. For every $1 invested in mitigation, there's $10 return. $6 to $10. What I know is you invest $1, you get more than that back. So that's huge. And what we have to start thinking about that and really investing in that. That also, though, does give people hope. Right messenger, super important. The environmental wackadoo telling you to do clean water, that's me, by the way. That's not always the right messenger. But the oil and gas industry guy talking about how we don't need to change from oil and gas, probably not the right messenger. Right. So we've got to get that right. And, rural person versus city person, every bit of that's really, really matters. So journalists out there who are studying to do better and find better ways to talk about this, thank you. We're at your beck and call. If you need us, we'll help you talk to our communities at the local level on that. But I do think it's got to be that story of hope. There's more. We can do this.
I'd add one last thing, and it's about using storytelling to also normalize the importance of action.
Yes.
And I'll give you an anecdote from my 7-year-old son who just joined Scouts. He was at his first camping trip, and somehow earthquake preparedness came up at the campground. And he's like, he grew up in Oakland, California for most of his youth. And so he's like, oh yeah, I know what to do. I get under the table, I do this. And like, he showed everybody else, and a kid was scared because they were like, do people die from natural disasters? And one of the scout leaders was like, oh, doesn't happen very often. And my son, who has me, who works at FEMA, was like, excuse me, actually, people die all the time from natural disasters. But because he knows of it in a context of we are doing something, we're trying our best to come together to take action, he wasn't scared about it. It is a fact of life that we do something about. And so for him, it was just like, yeah, of course people die, and therefore we do things.
Yeah.
Can I just add one
course.
quick point? And it's about dosing of stories like this. And maybe this is a polemic, but you know, in our national media and to lesser extent in local media, there's just this everyday clubbing of you are gonna, you know, and so I think we have to, you know, put this in a way that people can hear it, not clubbed to death every day by climate change, which engenders this fear. So it's not just the hope and the messenger and the what, it's like how much you get.
Yeah. It's definitely very tricky having this conversation. I'm now thinking of the movie Don't Look Up. I don't know if anyone here has seen it. It's definitely what not to do, but I think it was very eerily similar to present day behavior. So I think we have a lot to learn, but thank you all for your insight.